pelikulang ito ay rated PG. Ito ay nangangailangan ng patnubay at gabay ng magulang para sa mga batang manonood.
Welcome to Salvation E-Story, where we show different stories from the Bible. And for today's segment, we have the Book of the Kings and the Judges. Now, let us welcome our hosts, Miss Carmela and Miss Ella.
Yes, hello Philippines and hello world, and welcome to Salvation E-Story. So, how are you today, partner?
I am super duper great. How about you, partner Carms?
I am feeling fine too, partner, and I'm so excited for today's segment because we are going to witness the stories of some of the most famous kings of all times. Plus, the most notable king of all will be determined by our panel of judges. So, partner, without further ado, let's introduce our judges for today.
So thank you for that wonderful introduction, partner Carms. Allow me to introduce our judges that came from two divisions. But before that, I will give a brief explanation about the existence of our judges for today. In the book of Judges, a cyclical pattern is given to show the need for the various judges. These needs included times of a leaderless state of the Israelite people, hardship, and the crying out to the Lord for rescue. The judges were successive individuals, each from a different tribe of Israel, chosen by God to rescue the people from their enemies and establish justice and practice of Torah among them. They were, however, in no way equal to a king. The institute of judges was separated from the institute of a king in the Bible, and all biblical judges undertook judicial tasks. Their principal goal was to deliver salvation, rest, and peace to the land by obtaining justice for the Israelite people in the face of their foes and driving away their oppressors. First, let us welcome these two major judges who are called the warrior judges of the Bible. The first was a great field commander and a counselor. She was also a woman. She is also known for her gifts of military tactics, strategic planning, and sheer leadership on the battlefield. When the people of Israel were oppressed by a king named Jabib, she effectively incited a rebellion and defeated the king's armies, which is no other than Deborah, and she had served as a judge for the next 40 years.
Good morning, everyone. I am Judge Deborah, a prophet and heroine who inspired the Israelites to a mighty victory over the Canaanite oppressors. I became the judge of Israel because of my faith, wisdom, fairness, and obedience to the Lord.
One of the last major judges was probably also the most well-known of all the judges. He was born to a barren woman by promise. He was given supernatural strength by God in order to combat his enemies and perform heroic feats such as killing a lion, slaying an entire army with only the jawbone of a donkey, and destroying a pagan temple. He is no other than Samson, and like many men, he had weakness as well. His three weaknesses is, first, his attraction to a deceitful woman, his hair, which rendered him impotent, and last, his impulsive wrath would prove disastrous for him in the end. It is said that Samson had judged Israel for 20 years.
Good day, everyone. I am Judge Samson, a legendary Israelite warrior, granted with physical strength and used it against the Philistines. I disobeyed God because of Delilah, who was a Philistine. I fell madly in love with her beauty, even though she is a prostitute, and her beauty became my weakness. Each of the country's leaders promised to give her 1,100 silver coins to loosen my powers and take me captive. Because of my affection towards her, I revealed my weakness, which is my hair.
And she made him sleep upon her knees, and she called for a man, and she caused him to shave off the 7 locks of his head, and she began to afflict him, and his strength went from him.
And without further ado, let's welcome the two major judges. His name was of Hebrew origin, which means splendid, and he was from Bethlehem. He is the illustrious judge of Israel, and he is no other than Ibzan.
And after him, Ibzan of Bethlehem judged Israel. Judges 12:8. Greetings, I am Ibzan, one of the minor judges of Israel from Bethlehem, the tribe of Zebulun. For all of you to know, I am part of the book of Judges, chapter 12, verses 8 to 10. I have ruled for 7 years, and I have 30 sons and daughters. I present as the successor of Jephthah. People do not remember me for my military success, since I had no military campaigns during the time that I reigned Israel, but for the marriages of my children, which extended my influence to the tribes of Israel, wherein I solidified my power and authority.
And for our fourth judge for today, who single-handedly killed an extraordinary number of combatants in a great feat of combat, he killed 600 Philistines, and he is no other than Shamgar.
And after him was Shamgar, the son of Anath, which slew of the Philistines 600 men with an ox goad. Judges 3 verse 31. Good day, I am Shamgar, son of Anath, the third judge of Israel. I live in northwestern ancient Israel in tribal lands. My enemies were Philistines, and I killed 600 of them with an ox goad. I am considered as minor judge, yet I saved the nation. I saved the Israel.
Now that we finally met our judges, it's now time to get to know our participants for today, and that is none other than our mighty kings. But before anything else, let me give you a glimpse of what the Book of Kings is all about. The next period of salvation history is typically referred to as the monarchy, and it is the kingdoms of Judah and Israel. Eventually, the Israelites want their own king. God reluctantly answers their plea. He has Samuel, the last of the judges, anoint Saul as the first king of Israel. At the same time, Samuel warns the people of the dangers of kings and empires. Saul has many problems and is eventually killed in battle. David follows Saul as the second king. David is a mighty warrior and unites all the tribes into one kingdom. After David's death, one of his sons, Solomon, builds a temple at Jerusalem, the capital city. Despite their many positive accomplishments, both David and Solomon are guilty of many sins in building their empire, succumbing to the temptations of violence, sex, and power. After Solomon's death, there is disagreement among the tribes, and the kingdom was split in two. Israel is the name of the northern kingdom, and Judah is the name of the southern kingdom. And now, the most awaited part of this program. Let us all welcome the three famous kings. The floor is all yours.
Kish, of the family of Metrotes, a member of the tribe of Benjamin, uniter of the tribe of Israel, the protector of my people, and the first king of the Israelites.
The Israelites have been strong central leadership for nearly 4 centuries, and they wanted an earthly king so they could be like the kingdoms around them, whose leaders exhibited an image of magnificence and ceremonious style. There was also a concern that rival nations were growing in power and could potentially pose a threat to them. As a result, they request the prophet Samuel to appoint a king.
Prophet Samuel, we wish for you to find us a ruler, one that can protect us from the Philistines and treat us fairly.
I agree. We lack what other nations have, which is a great king to judge us.
Is God not good enough to be our leader? Has He not protected us? Was He not there in our time of need?
But we demand a king of our own choosing.
Enough! I shall consider your request, but first, I must consult with our Lord on this matter. O God Almighty, I have come to ask for your guidance. The people seem to think that you are not enough to be our ruler, and have asked me to choose a king. What should I do?
Listen to the voice of the people, according to all that they say to you, for they have not rejected you, but they have rejected me from reigning over them.
My Lord, I shall do as you wish. But who is worthy among my people such a title?
I will send to you a man from the land of Benjamin, and you shall anoint him to lead over my people. He shall save my people from the hand of the Philistines. For I have seen my people, because their cry has come to me.
There was a man of Benjamin whose name was Kish. He had a son whose name was Saul. From his shoulders upward, he was taller than any of the people. There was not a man among the people of Israel that is more handsome than him. One day, 2 donkeys went missing, and he instructed Saul to find it along with his one servant. Saul and his servant traveled through many lands and arrived at the land of Zuph, but still could not find the donkeys.
It seems the donkeys are nowhere to be found. Let us go back. I am sure Father has grown concerned about us.
Wait! There is a prophet in the city, and he is a man who held in honor. It is said that all he says come true. Perhaps he can help us.
But if we go, what can we take with us? What do we have to offer?
Here, I have with me a quarter of a shekel of silver.
Ah, well done. Let us go now.
Saul approached and asked Samuel,
May I ask where the seer is?
I am the one that you have been looking for.
Then I have a question. Do you know where...
Go up before me to the high place, for today you shall eat with me. And as for your donkeys that were lost 3 days ago, not set your mind on them, for they have been found. And for whom is all that is desirable in Israel? Is it not for you and for all your father's house?
I only hail from the humblest clan of the Benjaminites. Why do you speak to me with such grandeur?
Come with me.
Then Samuel took Saul and his servant and brought them into the hall, and gave them a place at the head of those who had been invited, who were about 30 persons.
See what is kept before you. Eat, because it was kept for you until the hour appointed, that you may eat with the guests.
Saul ate with Samuel that day and was given a place to sleep in. Then at the next day, Samuel woke up Saul and said,
Up, that I may send you on your way.
So Saul and his servant woke up and began following Samuel out into the street. As they reached the outskirts of the city, Samuel approached Saul and said,
Tell the servants to go ahead of us, and when he does, come back here and stay for a while, so that I reveal to you the word of God.
Then Samuel took a vial of oil and poured it upon his head and kissed him and said,
Is it not because the Lord hath anointed thee to be captain over his inheritance?
Samuel anointed Saul privately. Anointing was God's commissioning to kingship. Now it remained for Saul to accept the kingship as God's mission for him, and it remained for the people to accept him as their king. So that was a great introduction from our first participant. Let us hear from Judge Shamgar. What can you say about King Saul?
You know, host Ella, I admire King Saul for succeeding in liberating Israel from its enemies and extending its boundaries. He has the quality of a king indeed.
So what are we waiting for? Let us proceed to the notable performance of our first king during his reign.
During the time of the prophet Samuel, Israel was a nation under the guidance of prophets and judges, ultimately ruled by God. Israel, however, wanted a king. Like all other nations, they wanted a man of their own choosing to rule them. Samuel was perplexed by this idea and knew this was a bad decision. The people of Israel demanded a king. As usual, Samuel prayed. God answered his prayer and told Samuel, "Obey the voice of the people. They have rejected me from being king over them. Solemnly warn them and show them the ways of the king who shall reign over them." He told the people, "You'll be disappointed in the king. He will tax you, take land and crops from you, and work you harder than you thought possible." The people were persistent. In the tribe of Benjamin, there lived a young man named Saul. He was taller and better looking than anyone else in the whole nation. This was the kind of king that the Israelites wanted. Samuel anointed Saul as the king of Israel. In a grand coronation ceremony, Samuel presented Saul to the people. "Long live the king!" Israel shouted. The new king got right to work. One of Israel's enemies, the Ammonites, invaded an Israelite city. Saul summoned the people. The men came, hundreds of thousands of them. They gathered as an army, surrounded the city, and slaughtered the enemy. Saul went out again with his army and slaughtered another invading force. The more victory Saul had, the prouder he became. Israel and Saul soon forgot that God was responsible for their victory. But then something changed. After yet another successful battle, Saul was supposed to wait for the priest Samuel to come so he could offer a sacrifice. Instead, he decided that he himself was worthy of sacrificing to God. This was a big mistake. Samuel showed up soon after and confronted him. "You have sinned," Samuel told him. God's favor and blessing on Saul was about to change. Things got worse. Sure, Saul was enjoying great military success, but he was also disobeying God's commandments. As Saul came to one enemy city, preparing to conquer it, God told Saul and his army, "Destroy everything." But Saul disobeyed. Instead, he took the good stuff for himself. He didn't destroy it. He stole. God had to reject Saul as king of Israel. Later on, when God chose David to be Israel's next king, Saul's fury increased. He was jealous of David and called out his entire army to find David and kill him. Sadly, Saul's life came to an end during a battle with the Philistines. He was wounded by an arrow from the enemy. Rather than be killed by the enemy, he decided to end his own life. He fell upon his sword and died. What a tragic end for Israel's first king. They had wanted a king so badly. They thought they had him, tall, strong, handsome, and a great warrior. But he rejected God, so God rejected him as king.
I am King David, the one who defeated the giant Goliath.
What a brave king you are, King David. I can't believe you managed to defeat a giant. Now, let us ask Judge Samson, who is also known for his strength, on what he can say about you. Judge Samson?
I can say that he is indeed the chosen one to become a king because he has what Saul does not, which is the heart for God. It is the courage, commitment, and the heart that matters. The fact that he believes that God is with him, he thinks bigger than the obstacles and acts as if it is impossible not to fail.
That was so nice of you, Judge Samson. And now let us know more about King David's story by watching this video clip. Roll VTR.
The story of the Bible begins in a place where heaven and earth are united as one, the Garden of Eden.
And in that place, God installs his image, Adam and Eve, who will be God's royal priests and rule all creation on God's behalf. And this whole scenario is called God's blessing.
But they're led astray by a deceptive creature, and they're exiled from the heaven on earth place, and lose their job as royal priests. And humanity spirals down into violence.
But God promises that a future descendant will come and defeat that deceiver by striking his head while also giving up his life, so that all the world can experience the blessing of Eve again.
This promise is passed on to Abraham and his family, from whom this royal priest will come. And this family grows and becomes a large people.
And so God invites all of Abraham's family to become a kingdom of priests. God will come and live among them in the tabernacle, and that's where Israel's priests will do their work.
But that priesthood gets off to a horrible start.
Yeah, and so when Israel eventually becomes a nation, their priesthood has become really corrupt. And so the people start asking for a king.
And eventually, God raises up David.
King David. And he's full of trust in Israel's God. In fact, with God's help, he defeats Israel's most powerful enemy.
All without proper weapons and without an army.
Now, not long after becoming king, David goes up into the high hills at the center of Israel's tribes, and he establishes a capital city, Jerusalem, otherwise known as Zion or the City of David, and it's like a new Eden.
This is the same hilltop Abraham visited. It's where he met Melchizedek, and it's where God provided a substitute sacrifice for Abraham's failures.
Exactly. And so David brings the tabernacle up into the city so he can make this the place of God's royal presence.
And during the inauguration, David's dancing with excitement.
Not only that, he deliberately dresses like Israel's high priest. And once the tabernacle arrives, he offers a sacrifice and makes this huge feast for all of the people, and he blesses them.
King David is acting like a new kind of priest.
Yes, and God approves. In fact, in the next story, God promises that from David's line will come a king who will reign forever and build the ultimate new Eden, a temple for God's presence.
David talks about this descendant to come in a poem we call Psalm 110.
Yeah, David recalls God's promise that one of his descendants will rule at God's right hand. And he goes on to say that this future king will be a priest like Melchizedek.
Yeah, Melchizedek, he's a priest king that even Abraham honored. Melchizedek's priesthood is older than Israel's priesthood.
Exactly.
But why can't David be that royal priest?
Well, David was pretty amazing sometimes, but he also failed. He slept with the wife of one of his soldiers, and then, in order to hide the whole affair, he had that man killed.
That's horrible.
It is. And his failures actually continued, leading up to this key moment where Israel's enemies were threatening to attack. And sadly, David doesn't trust God to deliver him like he did in his early days.
Right, he counts all of his soldiers. He's trusting his own power instead of trusting God.
And so God's not happy. He brings severe consequences on Israel. And David responds by surrendering to God and by offering his life as a substitute sacrifice on behalf of the people.
That's like Moses, who offered himself for the sins of the people.
And it's like Isaac, who was offered up for Abraham's sins, but then God provided a substitute.
I see, so there is a pattern here.
Right, and it's this pattern that leads us to the story of Jesus. He claimed to be the promised royal priest that the story's pointing to, the one who will bring the blessings of Eden and restore humans to their lost calling to fulfill God's promises to Abraham and David. And it's his story that we will look at next.
I am King Solomon, the wisest king of them all. Guard, what is this commotion inside my palace?
My king, two ladies wish to speak to you.
So be it. What seems to be the problem here?
My king, at night, this woman took my child and claims that it is hers.
You liar! I did not take your child. This baby is mine and yours is already dead.
You liar!
No, you're the liar.
Guard, cut the baby in half and give each piece of the baby to both of the women. Since both of you want the baby, you can share him equally, right?
Please, don't kill my baby. The woman can have him, but please don't cut him in half.
I am fine with your decision, my king, so the child can be hers or mine.
No!
Guard, give the baby to this lady, because I know she's the real mother.
Thank you, my king. Thank you.
A real mother would never let any harm come to her baby, even if it comes down to her giving the baby up to another. A mother prioritizes the baby before her own.
Oh my gosh! I hope I have that kind of wisdom when it comes in choosing the right answer in Anafi. Charot. That was an intense scene. What can you say about this, Judge Ibzan?
I agree with what you've said, host Allah. Solomon asking for wisdom was very selfless of him, so that he can do good to his people. He is one of the kings people should look up to.
Let us now watch the final presentation of our third king.
King David's reign had come to an end, and Israel was ready for a new king. God told the priest Zadok and the prophet Nathan to go to David's son Solomon and anoint him king over all Israel. Solomon was very happy to be king. After he was crowned, he went to worship the Lord. He offered hundreds of sacrifices to show God how much he loved him. That night, as the exhausted King Solomon fell into a deep sleep, he had a dream. God gave him a message in the dream. "Solomon, whatever you want, I'll give it to you," God said. God wanted to bless King Solomon because God knew that the people of Israel needed a good king that loved the Lord. Solomon thought about the dream and knew exactly what to ask God. He did not need any more money or possessions. Instead, as the leader of a great people, he needed wisdom. God answered his prayer, and Solomon became the wisest man in the world. In addition to making him wise, God also made him very rich and honorable. Solomon's first great job was to build the new temple. This temple was one of the most beautiful and expensive buildings in the world. Solomon ordered precious wood, valuable stone, much gold, silver, and fine cloth. The new temple would be a marvel of beauty because it was the house of God. 7 years later, when the temple was finally finished, everyone in Israel came to the celebration. They offered thousands of sacrifices, prayed long prayers, and sang many songs. God was very happy and filled the temple with the light of his glory. The people praised God with all their hearts. But something sad happened to Solomon. Solomon was so rich and could have anything his heart desired. What he desired more than anything else was wives. So Solomon got them, hundreds of them. He had 1,000 women that he treated as his wives. Solomon disobeyed God, as God said that a king should only have one wife. These new wives came from all over the world. They did not know the one true God and worshipped false idols. They turned Solomon's heart away from God, and soon Solomon started praying to these false gods as well. Disobedience became prevalent, and soon God's blessing on Solomon would be revoked. God punished Solomon and told him that his kingdom would be split in two. After Solomon's reign, his son would be rejected by the people of Israel. As wise as Solomon was, His wisdom, riches, and women brought him destruction, and God rejected him as king.
Wow, that was really good, right, partner?
You're super right, partner Carms. I've never seen such a performance before. They are really blessed to be God's vessel in helping the people of Israel.
Of course, partner, we really learned a lot, especially from the three kings who once reigned the city of Israel. But before we end this, let us hear the final judgment coming from Judge Deborah. Judge Deborah, the floor is all yours.
Good morning once again to everyone, especially to our participants, the great kings of Israel. I can really say that you have the best during your reign, from being the first king of Israel to the fighting of Goliath, and for being the wisest king known. You all did a great job, and I want you to remember that crowns aren't made of rhinestones. They are made of discipline, determination, consistency, and a rare trait called courage. May the best of the best wins.
Thank you so much, Judge Deborah. And now, while waiting for the results, let us have some icebreaker with our audiences. Are you guys ready? Thank you so much for participating, everyone. And we've finally come to an end. And it's now time to announce the winner for today's event. And the crown belongs to King Solomon. Congratulations on being hailed as the most notable king of all time. And that was because of your great wisdom. Once again, congratulations, King Solomon.
Thank you so much to the judges, and especially to everyone.
Indeed, tonight's episode was so fun and full of learnings, and I hope everybody enjoyed today's segment, the Book of Kings and Judges. Once again, this is your host, Carmela.
That ends our event for today. Thank you for tuning in, everyone. See you again next week. Bye!